What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Titletown Talk. I'm your host, Ian Ewing. Happy Friday. Welcome to the show. We are live on YouTube and all your podcasting platforms yet again. On today's episode, we are going to do our second of our two-parter, the Most Likely Packers show, and we're going to look at the fifth round and later type of guys today. At the end of the show, we're going to look at all the players who are both Senior Bowl attendees and top 30 visits. And what does that mean, guys? What does that mean? What it means is it's going to help us narrow down the most likely Packers to a smaller list on what we know so far. History indicates that they're going to take two of the guys that we talk about it, so I think it's definitely important. As a reminder today, quick caveat, go buy the Green Bay Draft Guide from Packer Report. We're going to be using that for all of our info today, and, they're just good people, so go support them. Before we do that, though, we're going to talk about Dexter Lawrence, because I got a lot of messages about this, and I thought to myself, why haven't I talked about this yet on the podcast? So we're going to do that right now. It appears the Giants and Dexter Lawrence are at an impasse. And quite frankly, Dexter Lawrence wants a brand new fat contract in his age 28 season, coming off of his worst season, I might add. And the Giants, they want to pay him like $20 million, and he wants like 30. So there's quite a gap there in what he wants and what the Giants want to pay him. So as far as what the Packers, where do they play into this? Obviously, he asked for a trade. The Giants have been like, no, we're not going to trade him, even though we all kind of knew that they're probably going to trade him. But I feel like we need to talk about if it makes sense for the Packers or not. Now, on the surface, all-pro player, one of the best pass-rushing DTs in the league. He's a nose tackle. But what would it cost to get him? Schefter was on, I forget which show it was, ESPN Milwaukee, and he said that it might take like a second and a fifth round pick, which is interesting. The question is, do the Packers want to give that up? I think it's probably unlikely. And, candidly, I'll get to it in a second. I'm a little nervous as well because, again, he's coming off of his worst season. He's had some recent injury history that's not so great. But what do the Packers have? What makes it interesting is that the Packers have Devontae Wyatt, okay? And he is a potential trade ship in all this. Now, Devontae Wyatt also wants a new deal. He's going to want a new deal. He's playing on the fifth-year option this year, so he's fairly cheap. He's not going to cost as much as Dexter Lawrence. Shocker. But he's not as good of a player, to be honest. But is it possible that the Giants would want to go younger and get a more up-and-coming player out for the old? Maybe they do. But here's where it gets interesting. Devontae Wyatt is not younger than Dexter Lawrence. They're the same age. They're both 28 years old, which I had to triple check this because I kind of forgot that when Devontae Wyatt came into the league, he was 25 years old. And this is why the Packers typically do draft younger players because, when 30 hits, it's kind of when a lot of positions fall off. Now, DTs, you could argue they play well a little bit further after that. Kenny Clark certainly has. They're at the same age. Now, Dexter Lawrence has been in the league much longer, but, maybe it makes sense for the Packers with where they're at in their Super Bowl aspirations. The Giants are pretty far away. No offense to Giants fans. Maybe the Packers want to get the more ready player like Dexter Lawrence for the Super Bowl run. Maybe that makes sense, right? Now, if it was like a third-round pick in Devontae Wyatt for Dexter Lawrence, I would consider that, right? Or maybe it's like next year's third, this year's fourth in Devontae Wyatt. I'd be open to that too. But the new contract is the key here. If he really wants $30 million plus, do the Packers really want to give him that deal? I mean, you guys know they got a lot of contracts coming due. So it's a fair question. Do they want to pay him that? Well, like I said earlier, he's had some recent injury stuff come up. He's coming off his worst season. It would make the Packers much better. He's better than Devontae Wyatt. No one would argue that. But at the same time, when Devontae Wyatt's been healthy, he's been one of the best pass rushing DTs in the league. And he played much better against the run last season than he had at any point. So I have little doubt that Goody has called the Giants. They've probably talked about it. And if the Giants come down their asking price to something what we talked about there, it's an intriguing idea. But overall, I think I would rather ride with Devontae Wyatt. Even though he's the same age as Dexter Lawrence, he's still an up-and-coming player. And I would probably pay him, $15 to $20 million versus the, 30 that Dexter Lawrence is going to command. So we'll see. I think it's interesting. I don't think this is one of those, the Packers, there's a 0% chance this happens. I'm not going to go that far, but I still think it's probably like a 20% chance it happens, maybe a 15. But they've surprised us before. Goody surprised us by trading for the best defensive player in the league last year. So we shall see. All right, before we go position by position, let's talk about a few more top 30 visits that were reported. The first one, Chris Brazzell out of Tennessee, the wide receiver. We talked about him on our wide receiver preview. Fast, Big guy, deep threat, all the things the Packers look for. He checks all the boxes. But I heard Justice Mosqueda on Pack-A-Day recently talking to Andy Herman about this, and it's a fair point. Tennessee guys, Ole Miss guys, they typically come into the league and they're not very good. The Tennessee offense, the Ole Miss offense, they're not real offenses. They're basically just running straight down the field all the time. So what does that mean? Well, we have to basically ask Chris Brazzell to do something he's never done before, which is run a full route tree, block. Do I think that he could be the guy who succeeds? I think at some point someone's going to succeed in that, coming out of that system. I don't think it's going to be like this forever where people sort of flame out. And he is a good enough athlete to succeed. We'll see. He's a top 30 visit. He's on the consensus board right around 52 where the Packers are picking. Dane Brugler, who has the beast, the draft guide from The Athletic. I encourage you guys to take a look at that. We're going to quote a few of those in this podcast. He has him more as like a third, fourth round guy. And Dane does talk to the NFL teams. So maybe the NFL teams see him a bit lower. Maybe he's there in the third. If he's there in the third and they get a DT in round 1, I think you run the card up for him. But I do think it's pretty interesting that they brought him in, and it's a name to watch for sure. Next one they brought in was massively intriguing. I still am trying to make sense of this one. LSU safety A.J. Halsey. I have no idea why they're looking at safety, candidly. He did have an injury last season, so maybe they're like, just checking on his leg injury. They're doing their due diligence, right? I'm sure that's possible, right? Really, really like the player, but I just don't see how a safety fits into this team right now. They're technically 4 deep at safety, but even if you want to be like conservative, they're 3 deep. And I like Jonathan Baldwin. I have a feeling this is not a real top 30 visit. I think they're just looking at the injury there. Maybe they see a role for him in Gannon's defense. Gannon's played a lot of dime. He's played the 3 safety looks before. Maybe he is someone we consider there. But at this point, we just have to look at it as probably just due diligence. They also brought in Lee Hunter, the Texas Tech DT, defensive tackle. He's right around the 40-50 range on the consensus board. Like his tape, not very athletic. Even if you figure in the fact that he's a DT, he's not very athletic. To me, it would be a bit of a surprise if they took him, but I like the tape. What we can take out of this more importantly is they're clearly looking at wide receivers and defensive tackles at 52. All the guys that they brought in to this point on top 30 visits that are around the 52 area are DTs and wide receivers. We'll talk about my predictions more next week before the draft starts, and we'll talk about it a little bit more at the end as well. But we're up to 27 visits. They got 3 more. That's it. Haven't brought in a ton of top 100 guys. Let's go through the names really quick. I have them here. Ted Hurst, Mike Washington Jr., Romello Height, the edge, Caleb Proctor, Kristen Miller, Will Lee, Chris Brazzell, and A.J. Halsey. So there's some names there that we definitely should be looking at. Variety of positions there. We'll see what happens. We'll talk through a few of these in some clear patterns at the end of the show, like I mentioned earlier. All right, let's go position by position. We'll talk about some of the later round guys that make sense for the Packers, some names to look for. Like I said earlier, any scouting reports I use Dane Brugler's guide, The Beast. I encourage you guys to just Google Dane Brugler, The Beast. Get an athletic subscription. It's like $3 a month. It's massively worth it. All the stuff that we do post-draft, looking at the scouting reports for the UDFA guys, all the draft picks, we're going to be using that to do it. So I encourage you guys to get that. Let's start with quarterbacks, who they might pick in the later rounds. Baron Morton's the obvious one because he's a top 30 visit. He's a quarterback from Texas Tech. Checks all the boxes. He just doesn't have a great RAS score. He's got a really nice arm. The one thing I will say with him is he's probably like a UDFA, maybe a round 7 guy. But they usually bend when the RAS isn't there. He has all the size requirements, and he's played plenty of football, and he's played at a high level. Hasn't turned the ball over much. I think he had like 21 touchdowns, 6 picks or something. So definitely a guy to keep an eye on. I wouldn't draft him, but UDFA, bring him in for competition. It's worth a look. Taylon Green from Arkansas is the guy I want. If you guys haven't watched him, look up Taylon Green, Arkansas. The dude's a freak show athlete. One of the most athletic quarterbacks probably to ever come out of college. And if you're going to take a later round quarterback, get a guy like this. I think Malik Willis showed us, right, that when your starting quarterback is out and you're trying to win games in a pinch, right, if Malik had to start the whole season, now we could argue this, right, you're not going to make the playoffs there. But if you lose your quarterback, if Jordan goes down for 4 or 5 games, if you win 2 or 3 of those games, you can kind of maintain your status in the playoffs, right? I would bet on a guy like Taylon Green, who you can run a lot of creative stuff with. He can literally run the ball. He's got a rocket arm. Really, 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 really raw, but he's worth looking at. I would draft him as early as round 5. And if I had to say, like, who's a guy they would shoot the dart on in the draft, if a draftable guy, Taylor Green's the guy I would pick. He was also at the Senior Bowl, which, again, everybody that was at the Senior Bowl, we're going to highlight on this episode. He's 144 on consensus, so 5th round, 6th round, I'd be happy with it. I have a feeling someone's going to pick him like round 4, round 5. I don't know if I'd be feeling that generous, but he's a 4.3 guy. He runs a 4.3. You could maybe get him in some specialized packages. He's the guy at quarterback who I like. Cole Payton from NDSU is another guy. Checks all the boxes, but he only has 13 career starts. And again, this FBS, FCS, whatever the hell the NDSU is, that's, smaller school. Packers aren't shy about drafting from there. They took Tucker Kraft from I think SDSU, South Dakota State, but Christian Watson from NDSU. But he's a high ceiling guy, Senior Bowl guy, but he's probably the one I think is least likely out of this group. So that's quarterback. The most likely, I would say round 5, take Taylor Green. Round 6, take Taylor Green. The most likely is probably Baron Morton because he's a top 30 visit. Basically all the top 30. Sean Clifford. Who's the guy from last year? I'm forgetting his name. Taylor Algersma, the Canadian guy. He was somebody that they brought in for a top 30 visit. Morton's the guy that I think we should be looking at. Running back. We talked about Kalen Black, however you say his name. Mike Washington Jr. as well. Black is probably around 5 and later, so he should be part of this episode, but we talked about him in the last episode because it wouldn't shock me if he was a round 4 guy. Adam Randall is another guy. I really like him. He checks a ton of boxes. He's from Clemson. Senior Bowl, Tier 1 fit for the Packers. He's 168 on the consensus board. He's 6'2", 232, though. He's a freak, man. If we left the draft with, Adam Randall as your only running back option, he's a guy who could sit this year, be a third-string guy, and maybe take, on a serious role next season when Josh Jacobs leaves, and he is going to leave next season. Seth McGowan's another guy I like, Tier 1 fit. He's from Kentucky. He's got basically everything the Packers look for. He's got really fun tape, too. I think and just to kind of big picture this, right, as much as I like Mike Washington Jr., I would be really happy with any of these guys later in the rounds as well. So he's another guy. He's also Senior Bowl, maybe round 5 for Seth McGowan, but he's a name to keep an eye on. And the last guy, Jaden Ott from Oklahoma, he's fun, too. He checks every single box except he's 203 instead of 205. 162 on the consensus board, so probably round 5 and later, but I think he's a really good scheme fit for what the Packers do. He's a little bit on the lighter side, but I think he would be a lot of fun. All 3 of these guys should be on our radar. I like them all round 5 and later. Of the guys we just named, Adam Randall's probably my favorite. So those are the running backs to watch late in the draft. Wide receiver, no particular order on this, but let's talk about Anthony Smith really quick. So he's a Tier 1 fit. He checks every box for the Packers, did all of his testing, and he was a top 30 visit. He's probably strictly a speed guy. He doesn't have a lot of routes on his route tree that he's been asked to run. So he's also there were a couple plays on his highlights where he took literal jet sweeps, just like the Packers do, and he did really well in those. But you could run him deep. Early on, he could be like your MVS. He could be, somebody who subs in for Christian here and there. And maybe down the road, he develops into a more well-rounded receiver. But he's Dane Brugler's 37th ranked receiver. It's not great there. Not on the consensus board at all. But ironically, Andy Herman did a breakdown on him, I think it was this morning, and he actually mentioned that he thinks he's draftable. I would agree with that. Round 6, UDFA, somewhere in that range. I'd be happy with Anthony Smith. If you miss out on a receiver in this draft early, get a guy who can compete at the end of the roster at this point, and then you just do it. Dane Brugler said he's a speed guy with drop issues. That sounds like a Packer. So anyway, he's a project, somebody you take late, and you pray he becomes what his ceiling is. Jacoby Lane, we talked about in the receiver episode. He's a Tier 1 fit except for his production not being there. We don't have his 3-cone either. But everything else is a check. He's 102 on consensus. It's a little rich for me. I probably would take him in round 4. But he's a Senior Bowl guy. So I think Jacoby Lane's someone to look at. Now here's the crazy part. I think if they don't take one in round 2, there's not a lot of guys in the middle that check every box for them. Now, obviously, they can go away from their thresholds, right? They did with Matthew Golden last year. They didn't have a lot of testing for him. But Golden had that freak show speed, right? That trait that makes him better than everybody else or that makes him stand out. The speed's there for Golden. Now, the speed's there for some of these other guys too. We went over a few in the receiver preview. And we talked about a few receivers last week on the round 2 through 4. But there aren't a lot of round 5 and later guys that I'm like, oh, this is obvious. I think Anthony Smith is the most likely from this group. Moving on, tight ends. Tight ends, oh boy. I've heard some debate out there as to whether tight end is a need for this Packers team. I would argue it is not a need, but I also understand, I'm sympathetic to the argument that it is. I think they need a blocking tight end for sure, but I also don't know who is a blocking tight end in this group, but they like guys who are super athletic, which is not surprising, shouldn't be surprising to any of us. There aren't any specific traits they look at. Their RAS score is the main one, which again, RAS builds in height and weight versus athletic traits, so there's some of that's built in, but Dallin Bentley is a guy I like. He's from Utah. He's 198 on the consensus board. He's really, really athletic. If he's really athletic and he can block, name to look at. John Michael Gillenborg from Wyoming. He's 223 on the consensus board. He had a 978 RAS score. So that's an athlete guy that you take late. You just kind of hope he turns into something. He was also a Senior Bowl attendee. Tanner Koziol from Houston, 213 on consensus. He's also Senior Bowl. 976 RAS. He's only 21 years old. I like the young guys like this who there's a lot of tapped potential, like a Jermichael Finley type. They picked him later. I think it was round 4. And just a guy who's a freak athlete that if you, with the right coaching, turn him into something better, you're increasing your chances with an athlete. So I don't know if they're going to take a tight end at all. I hope they don't take one on day 2. We went through a few day two names last week. It'd probably make me pretty mad if they took one on day 2, but there's some names we looked at. These are more likely. Interior offensive line, I think it's on the table as early. I think really offensive line in general is on the table as early as round 2. I wouldn't be shocked if they did it. It just has to be the right player. And I'm not the only one that's made this argument, but they got 5 starters who they've invested in. Jordan Morgan was a first-round pick. Anthony Belton, they're paying like $25 million a year. And they just reworked his contract, so he's going to be here at least the next 2 seasons. Otherwise, it's hell to cut him. I just paid Sean Ryan. Now, at center, you could cut him after this season and you'd be okay. Right guard, Anthony Belton, he was a second-round pick. And then Zach Tom, they just paid a shitload of money. So I don't see a way where this person plays. I'm not even sure that this person's the backup. I think Darren Kennard's probably the backup. So I don't know if it makes a lot of sense to use valuable resources on an offensive lineman, but it never hurts to take offensive linemen. So it's interesting to think about. A lot of their tier 1 fits, though, they're later round guys. Let's go through a few names here. I'm missing out on a few of these, but the first one, Fernando Carmona from Arkansas. He checks every box. He's 249 on consensus. He's round 6 and later. Also Senior Bowl guy. He's someone to look at for sure. Delby Lemieux from Dartmouth, small school guy. He's in the 300s on the consensus board. He's one to keep an eye on. He's got a lot of athletic traits that are intriguing. He's a Senior Bowl guy. He's a center. This is the guy you take at center when you already have Sean Ryan and Jacob Monk. Somebody who's a freak athlete, who can play around the line. He can play guard too. And you throw darts. That's all we're talking about here. Caden Barnett from Wyoming. He's also a perfect fit. He's 239 on the consensus board. He's listed at tackle on consensus, but they like guys who can play tackle and guard. A lot of their guards that have been successful over the year were tackles first. His versatility's there. I think that he's someone we need to look at as well. The most likely, though, of all these guys is Nathan Onianwa from Ohio State. He is a top 30 visit, and he was at the Senior Bowl, which we'll get into that in a minute. 330 on the consensus board. Keep an eye on him. Keep a close eye on him. He's a small school transfer. He transferred from, I think it was Rice to Ohio State. And he's someone we need to keep an eye on because he checks both the Senior Bowl box and the top 30 box. Not on the draft guide and low in the consensus, so he's probably a later round guy. Wouldn't take him before round 7 or maybe round 6. But Jacob Monk was not on the consensus board. I think he was like the 400s, and they took him in round 5. So they've done it before. Josh Geske from Illinois, also a top 30 visit. Not on the draft guide. And he's not on the consensus board that I could tell. So this is an undrafted free agent type guy. That's all the guards that we'll talk about. Offensive tackle is interesting. Riley Mallman from Wisconsin. He's 346 on the consensus board. He's a tier 1 fit in the draft guide. He's an R6 or later kind of guy. Gavin Ortega from Weber State is 439. He's way down there, but he checks every box. Alex Walschlager from Kentucky. Yes, that's a real name. 379 in consensus. These guys are all tier 1 fits. Trey Zune is another guy. I think he's Texas Tech. I actually didn't write about him on here, but I've seen some of the Packer Report guys talking about him as another option later. Versatile guy that plays tackle. It's interesting because there are not a lot of guys in that middle area that make a lot of sense at offensive tackle. So if early on one of the top guys falls, maybe they take a look at it. I don't know. I'm hesitant. They like Travis Glover. I don't know much about him. John Williams, they still like him. They got Darren Kennard. They're actually a bit deeper at offensive line than you'd think. If they're going to bring in depth, I don't want a guy they draft as much as I want a vet guy. Edge is interesting. We talked about a couple day 2 names that I like. And Danny Dennis Sutton from Penn State. I went back and did a deep dive on him after I recorded the last episode, and I'm surprised he's not getting more round 1 buzz. The dude's like a 99th percentile athlete. He was productive at Penn State. I'll say this, if he's there at 52 and the Packers take him, he's LVN insurance. I think that he can help early on, and he can be the guy that maybe they keep on instead of LVN. LVN's going to get the 5th-year option, I think, regardless. But maybe they decide like they want to go edge here because, it's a value position. Maybe he becomes the guy next to Micah down the road. We'll see. That's not for today. I'm already getting off a tangent. We'll talk about that when we get closer. Ethan Burke from Texas is a day 3 guy. He hits everything they're looking for. He's in the 240s on consensus, but maybe he's an option later. Anthony Lucas from USC is 134. He checks several boxes, but he's a later. I would not take him at 134. Michael Heldman, this is the one probably of all the edges to look at in the later rounds. Top 30 visit from Central Michigan. He's 269 on the consensus board. He's probably a round 7 or UDFA. Now, here's what's interesting about Michael Heldman. Daniel Jeremiah posted his rankings of players. I shouldn't say rankings, but a list of players that he likes that were not at the combine. Heldman was one of them. So Daniel Jeremiah talking about him. Daniel's pretty plugged into NFL teams. He's probably not a UDFA R7 guy. He's probably in the round 5, round 6 category. So maybe the Packers look at him, but a guy to keep an eye on because he's top 30 visit. Vincent Anthony Jr. from Duke. He checks every single box. He's just a little bit light. He's a couple pounds light. That's it. 231 in consensus and a Senior Bowl guy. Now, as far as edge goes, they have to be able to beat out Colin Oliver, Brenton Cox, or Barron Sorrell. If you don't think they're going to beat those guys out, then there's no point in picking them, in my opinion. I guess you could maybe make the argument that they beat out Aaron Mosby, but they re-signed Mosby. They gave him some legitimate money to be a special teamer. So they're already 5-6 deep at edge. The only way it makes sense is if you think this guy, whoever they draft, can beat out those 3 guys. If not, you just don't take him. Now, Dennis Sutton can do it. Romello Height in round 3 can do it. Everybody else, I'm a bit dubious. Defensive tackle. We talked through a lot of names at DT. You've heard them all. I'm sure you've heard them more from just me. So we'll kind of spare the early round guys. But later, actually, on day 3, there's a lot of good guys, a lot of depth here. First guy is Chris McClellan from Missouri. He checks every box you're looking for. He'd be a great consolation prize if the other guys don't end up going that route. James Thompson Jr. from Illinois. He's way down there on the consensus board, but he checks every box. Devin Eastern from Minnesota. He's tier 1 fit, and he's a Senior Bowl, so he's worth looking at. Jordan Vandenberg from Georgia Tech. Perfect RAS score. He's a very interesting player. Very, very high-end athlete. He's down at 235 on the consensus board. He's probably my favorite later round option. Round 5 through 7, you're kind of just throwing darts anyway, right? So if you're doing that, give me a freak show. Give me a freak show. This dude's a freak show. He's a top 30 visit as well, so I like this guy. I think that the Packers like this guy. We need to keep an eye on Jordan Vandenberg. Bryson Eason is the last guy we'll talk about. Tier 1 fit athletically and a Senior Bowl guy. 245 in the consensus board. I do want to talk about Ontario Thompson really quick. He's another guy we need to keep a close eye on. He's kind of a tweener between edge and DT. He's a top 30 visit. Really, really high RAS. He's a little short, but 9.3 RAS, 316 on the consensus board. Keep an eye on Ontario Thompson as well. So out of this group of DTs, Jordan Vandenberg and Ontario Thompson are the 2 to keep an eye on. Let's move to linebacker. So linebacker, I got a couple of mentions about Jacob Rodriguez. I would not pick a guy before day 3. I just wouldn't do it. Tyron Hopper complicates this a little bit. They don't really have a need this season, but they do kind of have a need next season. Zaire Franklin's under contract. So in theory, you could have him next season along with Hopper and Edgerrin Cooper, right? So you'd be 3 deep there. I don't really see it. Isaiah McDuffie's a free agent, right? if you have a guy you love, maybe like one of the top guys in round 1 end up coming into round 2, maybe you look at it, but I would be really hesitant to do that. But there's a lot of guys on day 3 that I really like. Tyron Hopper is weird. I'm surprised he hasn't become the starter yet. If he takes another step this season, they gave Zaire Franklin real money. So I don't even see a path to playing for Edge Cooper, honestly. Edge Cooper. Tyron Hopper. So I do wonder if it makes any sense to take a linebacker. Jalen Duggar is the one I think we need to keep an eye on. He's a top 30 visit for the Packers. He is 6'4", 242 at linebacker. 9'6" Raz. If you're going to take a guy late, take a freak show like this. I mean, this guy's a freak, man. I not being offensive either. I mean this with all the love. He just jumps off the page. He's got a pass rushing body type. Kind of has a Micah Parsons body type, to be honest. Not saying he's a Micah Parsons, but he's got some really insane athletic comps for his size. So he's a guy, maybe you see him as a versatile guy, maybe someone to compete with these other linebackers. Maybe he's a special teams guy, but he's 273 on the consensus board. There's no chance he's goes undrafted. By those numbers, he should be undrafted. He's probably like round 5, maybe earlier, probably not. He's the one to keep an eye on at linebacker. A couple other guys to go over. Caleb Alarms, or what a name. Tier 1 fit athletically. He's a Senior Bowl guy, probably round 5 and later. Jack Kelly from BYU. I liked him. Tier 1 fit, Senior Bowl. He had a 9.81 RAS score. He 163 on the consensus board. Carson Scherer from Iowa. He's a unit. Look him up. He's stacked. Round 7 guy, maybe UDFA, but I liked what I saw from him. There's a bunch of guys I'm leaving off here, ladies and gents, but I just want to try to save some time here. I do not think linebacker is going to be the route they go here, but could be wrong. Late round cornerbacks. We have a couple guys to go over here. Real quick about last season. All of us, myself included, wanted them to take a cornerback. I would have taken Trey Amos in the second with zero hesitancy at all. But they did bring in Micah Robinson last year as a top 30 visit. We all just kind of knew they were going to take him, and they did. They took him in round 7. There's a couple guys that sort of fall into that camp here. Kayron Prunty from Wake Forest. I think I'm saying his name right. He's 6'1", 190, 865 RAS. He's tier 1 overall, or through and through. Super physical corner. I'm actually excited to watch him a little bit more. He's 456 on the consensus board, but I think he's draftable. I would maybe take him in round 7. He's a name to look at. Malcolm DeWalt from Akron, probably another UDFA type. Bryce Phillips from San Diego State. He's probably round 7, but tier 1 athletic fit. And then lastly, Jaden Lucas, 422 on the consensus board. He's also a tier 1 fit. I actually like him. I would give him an extra look. And I guess I'll bring up this guy too, Latrell McCutcheon from Houston. He's 242 on the consensus board. He's also a tier 1 fit. So there's a lot of later round guys in that maybe round 5 to 7 that make a lot of sense. I want to touch on Charles Demings really quick. He's a guy who, Packers brought him in for a top 30 visit. We talked about him in our cornerback preview. Small school, Stephen F. Austin. Everyone was kind of saying, maybe he'd be like a Micah Robinson type, round 5 type of thing. I think they really like Charles Demings, and I think there's a world where they take him in like round 3. And you guys might not like that. I'll explain why in a minute. But we need to keep a close eye on Charles Demings. Safety, really quick. VJ Payne from Kansas State. They brought him in for a top 30. He's 129 on the consensus board, tier 1 fit. Deshaun Singleton from Nebraska. He's 275 on consensus. He's a round 7 guy, but also Senior Bowl. And then Austin Brown from Wisconsin. I like him. He's a tier 1 fit athletically as well. He's down in the 400s on consensus, but he checks every box. So, yeah, safety's interesting. We talked about Halsey a little bit earlier in the episode. I think they probably do not pick him, but it's interesting they brought him in. They clearly have some sort of interest in safeties because they've got a couple guys they brought in. Maybe they're looking at a different scheme, maybe 3 safety sets. I don't know. To me, that's going to be Oladapo, but I don't know, guys. We'll see. That's that. Let's talk through a few more things before we wrap up the episode. One thing we need to consider about this draft, I sort of alluded to it a minute ago with Demings, and a lot of evaluators think this way, and they all kind of agree that the draft falls off a cliff about pick 25. So what does that mean? It means the 25th ranked player and like the 120th ranked player aren't that different. Now, I know some people are going to perceive some of these picks as reaches because in our minds, we think 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. The 48th ranked player is better than the 102nd. That's the way we look at it. But in terms of the actual talent gap, there's not a lot. So a lot of teams are going to have different evaluations depending on who it is. So it's very possible the Packers really like Charles Demings. They see him as a round 3 pick, even though he's in the 140s on consensus. So I'm more or less warning all of you to have that perspective that maybe you think a guy is a 7th round pick, or, they could have gotten him later, which, I'm one of those guys too, by the way. And then they pick a guy in like two rounds earlier, and then we're all mad, right? This is not the draft to be like that, okay? So just keep that in mind as you get closer to the draft. You start seeing mock drafts, and you're like, oh, this person's ranked 142, and they picked him at 98. It's because these guys are really similar. In that point, it's an eye of the beholder type of thing. Before we wrap up, I mentioned earlier, I want to narrow the list down to a few names that are most likely to be Packers, combining both the 2 episodes, today's episode and last week's. And the way we do that is top 30 visits and Senior Bowl attendees. The Senior Bowl, they like Senior Bowl guys because they send their guys down there. They watch these guys get coached in a game setting. They do more extensive interviews with them. They see them against similar talent. And the Packers have always really liked Senior Bowl guys. I mean, Evan Williams was one of them. Last year, for example, Anthony Belton and Savion, they were Senior Bowl guys who were also top 30 visits. They drafted both those guys. Let's go through some history, right? 2024, Keaton Oladapo, Tyron Hopper. Again, they were Senior Bowl and top 30 visits. 2023, Carl Brooks, Lou Nichols, and Dontavian Wicks. 22, Devontae Wyatt, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs. All 3 of them were at the Senior Bowl, and they were top 30 visits. I'll keep going. In that same draft, Devontae Wyatt, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, they also had Darian Kinnard. Now, they didn't draft Darian Kinnard, but they signed him and traded for him later, right? Also, Gregory Jr., who maybe you guys don't remember, he was a corner. They brought him in for a top 30 visit, and they had him in, and he was a Senior Bowl guy. They brought him in eventually. 2019, we have to skip 21 and 20 because they were COVID years. Andre Dillard, they ended up bringing him in. Then 2018, Jamon Moore and Oren Burks. So the names so far this season that are both top 30 visits and Senior Bowl guys, Mike Washington Jr., Kalen Black, Ted Hurst, Ethan Onianwa, Lee Hunter, Romello Height, and Charles Demings. We got 3 more top 30 visits that are known, or that are unknown at this point. Sorry. It's easy to see a path where a few of these guys we just named are Packers. I think at least one of these guys ends up being drafted by the Packers. Going back to 2022, they picked at least 2 of these guys. And out of this class, I bet it's Demings and Ted Hurst. I bet they picked Ted Hurst in round 2. And I bet in round 3, they picked Charles Demings. I bet some of these other guys, these other corners that you guys have heard names of, they're going to be on the board and they pick Demings and everyone's going to be pissed. But this is just how the Packers operate. And Demings is a really good player. I really like him. So I wouldn't be mad at all, but I think there'll be a lot of Packer fans that are. So easy to conclude with what we have so far, that they're looking at corners, receivers, DTs. I think at 52, around that range of rankings that they brought in, I think receivers and DTs are what they're looking at. Last year, it was edge, DT, and wide receiver. The edges and DTs were gone, so they picked a receiver. I think that it's going to be similar this season. They're going to pick whichever one is best available. So that's going to do it for today's episode. If you guys are in the Midwest, be safe. We got some evil storms coming this evening, so be safe out there. Hopefully the storms treat you well. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment. Let me know what you guys thought of this episode. If you have a particular player you want the Packers to draft, let me know in the comments. If you're listening on podcasting platforms, download the episode, leave a 5-star review, and follow the Facebook page, Titletown Talk. And I will see you guys on the next episode. Thank you for listening.